Yeah.
Where's that sound coming from? Lights. Go Sam, you're awesome. We said that one finish, right?
Yep, I did. Around 1:30.
I'm like, okay, I'll get the phone and I'll get the door.
Hello, everyone. I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to get logged on. I think another couple of friends will be watching this afterwards, so that's awesome. Let me see if I can't get my table a little bit better situated so everyone can see. Right. Awesome. So good morning, good afternoon, whatever time you're watching this. We are going to be doing a really exciting painting event today. We're going to be making our friend Sonic the Hedgehog here. I'll try to move this a little bit so it's easier for everyone to see what we're following along with. You can kind of see in the background, this is the painting we'll be doing later on this week. If you'd like to tune into our YouTube, it's Hammar's Art Studio on YouTube. This tutorial is already up there, so it would be awesome to have a bunch of friends join in on that one as well. So today, we're going to be using just a couple of different paint colors. You'll notice that, I don't know if you can see from here, but Sonic's eyes are green. And we didn't give you any green paint, and that's because we've got yellow and blue and red. We've got 3 primary colors in this painting today, which is pretty awesome. The yellow and blue make green, so we'll be able to make Sonic's eye color really well with that extra paint we're going to have today. So I want to make sure everyone has all the utensils that we'll need today before we get started. So I've got my cup of water for washing my brushes off. I've got a couple of different size brushes here. I've got my round brush, my mini background brush. We're going to be using this small one today. If you've been to the studio or tuned in before, you probably know we've used, a larger 1-inch background brush. This one is quite a bit smaller, you can see, but that'll be really nice for going in around our starburst in the middle. We'll also need some kind of paper plate, wax paper, something that helps to keep our paint all in one place. And you're going to want to unfold or unroll your Sonic tracer. And we're actually going to be using this first today. If you've tuned in or, like I said, been to the studio before, we usually end up using this as one of our last steps. But today, our backgrounds are actually primed with a white paint color, so we don't actually have to do all this white that you see in here like we normally would. The reason that we did that is it just makes it a little bit easier to trace this in. We won't have to wait so long for our background to dry, and we can jump right into painting everything all at once. Not obviously all at once, we don't have 8 hands, but you know what I mean. So what we're going to do to get started is grab a pencil or 2, our tracer, and we want to lay that nice and flat. If it's crinkled or rolled up, just try to flatten it out very gently on your table. And I'm going to move my camera down so everyone can see what I'm doing. There we go, awesome. And we also will need a ruler in a little while. That's not going to be our first step today. Our first step today is going to be to take our pencil. We want to lay our tracer Sharpie side down, so the side with the Sharpie marker is going to go flat on the table, and the side with nothing on it will face up. Now you're still going to be able to see your tracer, your Sonic outline, because this is tracing paper, it's translucent, which makes it really easy to trace. So I'm going to take my pencil. I'm going to go ahead and start shading. Now, instead of pushing straight down onto my tracing paper, that could end up ripping it. It could put a little bit too much pressure on our paper and end up ripping it. So we want to make sure that we take our pencil and just very lightly, actually not very lightly, but get a good heavy coat of graphite using just the side of our pencil as if we were shading. So this might take a little bit of time. You might need to grab a wipe or wash your hands at some point because you'll notice as your hand moves around the paper, it's going to start getting some pencil lead, some pencil graphite right on the side of your hand, and that could end up smudging across your canvas. So definitely before we go in to trace Sonic onto our canvas, we're going to want to get our hand nice and clean. I'm going to start up here on his foot. That way, when I go around the rest of Sonic, I'm not smearing all that extra graphite, trying not to pick up too much. So we want to go ahead and we'll take a couple of minutes to get started with that, just going nicely around all the edges. Get them nice and traced in. You might need, the reason I said a pencil or two is because you might find that your pencil is getting dull while we're tracing this in, and rather than getting up and running to go grab a pencil sharpener, having two pencils just saves a little time. But it's okay if you need a pencil sharpener. So we're going to just trace all these lines in first. It might be easier if you kind of move your paper around like I am. I'm keeping my wrist on the table so I'm not smearing it along all of these nice lines we're adding in. Now you can kind of see while you're taking a look at your tracer that we didn't add every single detail. We added most of them, but not every single detail into Sonic, especially where the gray comes in. We'll be able to sort of shape his hands out with our paint. And you can see his eyes are just one big circle instead of his iris and his pupil. Going around his hands now. The face will be a little bit trickier, so I'm saving that for last. Yeah, you can see that happens. That's Sonic's foot right there on the side of my hand. So I'm gonna just kind of wipe it off. Sometimes if I'm using a really, really heavy pencil, sometimes you can just kind of wipe it off. But that just kind of shows you how well this will transfer, especially onto a nice white canvas like we've got here. All right, I'm getting into his face, and I'll give everyone at home a couple of minutes to finish up. I'm a pretty fast tracer. So I'm just noticing on his nose, and I'll mention this later as well, but if you can kind of take a look at my tracer for a second, you can kind of see right in his face, you've got his eye here. That's really easy to see. And then right here, it's a little bit confusing. So I'll go over that. This right here, the one that kind of sticks out a little bit farther towards the left or the right here, that's his nose. And then right behind it is where his eye is going to be. So that might get a little confusing when we go into paint. So I just wanted to mention that now. So hopefully I'll remember to say it again when we get into the details. Great, excellent. So I'm gonna go grab a wipe to get my hands nice and clean, and I'll let you guys keep working on your tracer, and then we'll do our next step when we get back. That there. All right, I'm gonna get started with our first step on our canvas. If you're still working on your tracer and you're not watching the recording, if you're watching the recording, you can just pause me. If you are, don't worry, we will catch you right up. It's gonna take me a little bit of time to get this transferred on here and explain the next set of instructions. So I'm gonna take my tracer. Now, the side that we just added the graphite on, we want to go ahead and flip that so that it's down on our canvas right about here, pretty much near the bottom is the bottom of my tracers, probably about a ½ inch above the bottom of my canvas, and you can actually kind of feel where the wood on the back of your canvas is. Go right about halfway into that with your tracer, and you want them pretty much centered right in the middle. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and do pretty much the same thing that we just did on the back, but on the Sharpie side now. So we want to make sure that we're doing it on the Sharpie side, because otherwise, if we have it flipped the other way, that graphite that we just added on isn't going to do much. So I'm going to go ahead and start tracing Sonic on. If through this process you feel like you maybe missed a line, or when you lift up your paper you feel like you missed something, maybe wait until after you finish completely filling them in. If you think you missed anything, just go back over those lines. Sometimes what happens when we lift our paper off and try to put it back on, it's tricky to realign where our tracer went, and we might end up with an image that kind of looks three-dimensional. We'll have two Sonics right next to each other. So I'm going to very carefully go around all my lines, maybe do it a second time just to make sure. But this time you don't have to worry so much. If you clean your hands before you start tracing, you don't have to really worry so much about it smearing if you're really careful. I'm going to start kind of the opposite end that I did before. So I'm going to start up on his head and do his face, and then work my way across and down to his hand. That way I keep my hand as clean as possible, but I have a little rag here just in case. So that might be a good idea. Make sure you get all the details on his face, because that will get really confusing later on. It's a little easier if you're tracing over, often when we're in the studio, we trace our tracers with pencil instead of with Sharpie. So going back over, you don't really know where you've hit already. Now these are fresh, brand new tracers, so you can kind of tell by looking at the Sharpie where you've already covered and where you still need to, which is good. Don't want to forget his mouth. I promise we'll start painting pretty soon. I know this is a little bit of setup for a more technical cartooning painting like this. We do need to set ourselves up a little bit so we don't end up with a mess on the canvas later. Right, working down, I'm almost at his foot. All right. Looks like I missed the top of his shoe right here, but that's okay. That's an easy line to fill back in. So when you're finished, it should look something like this. Pretty good tracer right in there. I'm gonna pop mine back up at my canvas. I mean, my canvas back in my easel, but you might wanna leave yours flat on the table for our next step. I'm gonna give our friends at home who are watching live a couple of minutes because I know this is a little bit of a trickier tracer to trace in, so I don't want them falling behind. But I'm gonna break out my ruler and my pencil next. While I'm waiting, I'm going to get out my yellow and my red paint. Now remember, with the yellow, we want to make sure we save some for when we go in just a little bit. We really don't need too much. So just as long as there's, maybe make a tiny little pile of yellow next to your larger one. That'll be good for when we go in to do our green little eyes on our Sonic. And we still will need, don't use up all your red when we go in to do the background, because we need it for his shoes. So just a couple of things to keep in mind when you're putting your paint out. But I'm going to set that to the side. We don't need that quite yet. All right, I'll give everyone about 30 more seconds to get their sonic traced in, and then I'm going to jump ahead. If you're still tracing, don't worry, this next step's pretty easy. I'm just using a ruler to make it a lot easier on myself. And I might actually take it out of my easel, just to make it easier on myself. Maybe not. Change my mind again. All right. So what we're going to do is start working in our starburst here. So it's up to you how many points, how many zigzags. We just want to make sure, the reason we traced in Sonic first is so we don't go out of these lines. So we do want to try to measure right across the top with our ruler. It should be about 11 inches. It is indeed. So we want to mark a little teeny tiny line at the 5.5, right halfway between 5 and 6. Right at the top of our canvas, right here. And that's going to be for our center line. And you could probably go ahead and do the same thing at the very bottom of your canvas for here. Now, if you feel like it's too tricky to do these little zigzags at the bottom, you could bring your starburst all the way down. And I might show you that too, just for to save a little bit of time and frustration. Right there like that. Awesome. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to do the yellow side first, I think. So I'm going to come down. Now we don't want to push very hard with our pencil. Just like with our tracer here, we want it nice and light, just so we can kind of see the outline, especially on the yellow side. Yellow and pencil graphite don't mix well. Kind of turn a grayish, yellowish green, which just isn't the prettiest bright color. I'm going to put a little zigzag right here. This will go pretty quickly. This one's going to come out this way, maybe. Bring this one to the edge. Here. I'm going to do one last zigzag this way. This one may be a little skinnier. And I'm going to bring this right off the edge like that. And I'm going to do similar design on the other side. You bring this down a little bit deeper towards his shoe. You make this one a little sharper. Bring this one off the edge. Down. I'm going to make a little one right here. Another longer one. And then right off the edge again. There we go. Now we got our starburst traced in. And I'll give everyone a couple of seconds to get that finished. And pull out our yellow and our red, our flat brush, and we can get started with paint. So I'm going to turn my desk back so it's easy to see. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started with my yellow first. Now, the reason that I wanna use the yellow first and not the red is because even though I have a nice cup of water here to wash my brush off, it just makes it a lot easier for us to fill in the yellow first. And since it's a brighter color, it's much more affected by the red than the red will be by the yellow. Obviously, red and yellow make orange when they're mixed together, so it wouldn't be the end of the world if they mixed a little bit. But just to keep it easier for us and a little easier on our brushes, the red pigment stains the brushes a lot more, so you just need to wash it for a lot longer than you would with the yellow. So I'm going to go in with my yellow. I'm gonna outline around here, around my starburst with yellow, and then I'll go ahead and fill the rest of it in. This might be easier to leave your canvas right on your table so that you can have it a little bit closer to you and you have somewhere to put your elbow down so you can make those lines really nicely. You can either use the flat part of your brush. I'm gonna go with the skinnier side to make these lines. Just might lift this up just a little bit to get right up to the top of our canvas, just to make sure we stay right along that edge. If you come in a little bit, that's okay. Try not to come in too far into our white, but we will be going in with a black outline at the very end, so that should be okay. I am kind of pulling the extra paint out here, just to make it a little easier when we go in to fill in. We won't have to come quite so close to our line. There we go. I will fill in up here, nice and carefully. Perfect. I'm gonna wash the yellow off. My brush nice and dry. On a rag or a paper towel. And for my red, you might want to flip your canvas so that it's a little easier to reach. So I might flip mine and put it on the table, or I'm just going to flip mine upside down in my easel so I can reach this side a little bit better. Just like when we were using our tracers, kind of moving things around so we're not inconveniencing ourselves. So I'm going to take my red on my nice flat brush, got it all nice and clean, and I'm going to do the same thing, outline first and then fill right in. Try to keep your brush strokes pretty smooth kind of all going in one direction. Start filling in this corner. If you feel like the red is too streaky for you, you might want to save some of your red for the end, and when we're finished filling in Sonic, you can go back and put a second coat over it when it's nice and dry. That'll help to kind of blend out any lighter areas, any streakiness that you might not want in there. All right, awesome. So I'll give everyone a little extra time to finish filling in. Flip my canvas back around. It's coming out like this. And the next color we're going to use is going to be our sandy kind of light, super light brown color. We're going to use that for Sonic's inside of his ears, his little, what do you call it? Mouth, muzzle. I don't know, he's a hedgehog, I don't know what they call it. His little belly here and his arm. Just this one, this part right here, that's part of his glove. So I'll give everyone just a few minutes to, a couple more minutes to get the red and yellow filled in and pull out our sandy color. Remember not to fill his legs in with this color too, because his legs are actually blue. You know, it can kind of you can get a little bit carried away when you've got a color, but we want to make sure we're kind of following along so he doesn't end up looking like he's wearing khakis. All right, so for this step as well, a lot of this painting actually really takes place flat on your table. I'm doing it up in the easel so that it's easier for you guys to see, but it's actually easier to paint cartoon laying flat. You don't have to worry about your elbow being hanging in the air. It's kind of got a place to nicely firmly sit on the table. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. As I said, we're going to be filling in the arm, that his hands, out flat on the ground. His mouth, right around his mouth, not his smile. His smile is going to stay mostly white, and we're going to put a little black in underneath, and his belly. So I'm working on his arm right now. Just very carefully filling it in. And we're using, sorry, I don't think I mentioned this, we're using our little teeny tiny brush, our little detail brush for this. We don't want to use our big flat brush or the round brush that we're going to use maybe in a little while to do the blue. We want to stick with our little tiny brush so we don't end up giving him a really big fat arm. We get nice skinny arms, so easier to keep it like that. I'm gonna go in and do his mouth next, and I'm going to very, very carefully go right around his smile so that I don't go in to those lines. I'm gonna do that part first. It's always a good idea when you're doing cartooning to outline first, and really anything, to outline a detail first and then fill it in. So I'm gonna go right around the edge of his mouth here. It might connect, but that's okay. Sometimes when you're outlining, you end up filling in anyways. It just helps to make sure we don't go outside the lines. Now we don't want any of this sandy color to go up here into where his eyes are, right? You can kind of see by our sample, those stay nice and crisp and white. And we'll need it for his little belly here. All right, awesome. I'm gonna get my brush washed off. And I think our best bet is to do our next lightest color next, which is going to be our gray. So you can go ahead when you're ready, you can pull out some gray onto your palette. I'll give everyone some time to get all caught up. Oh, I forgot his ears. I gotta do his little ears. I knew I was missing something with that sand color. Just inside, just the inside of his ear. The outline will be blue. There we go. Much better. So for the gray, we want to make sure you're using a really skinny script brush. Like I've got here, it actually probably looks more like this. Mine's a little bit puffy. And a nice skinny script brush with longer bristles, or our little detail brush that we just used for the sand color. That'll work as well. Because we're really just going to be doing a little bit of outlining with this gray and a little bit on his shoe. So we're going to take that gray and very carefully outline the details on his hands, on his socks, and the soles, the bottom of his shoes are going to be with this gray. So I'm gonna aim this towards me again. I would recommend leaving yours flat on the table. The reason we're doing the lighter colors first is it just makes, like with the yellow that we did before, just makes it a little easier. Hopefully his mouth and his hand, his arm and his hand and his belly will be all nice and dry by the time we go in and do the blue. It's just easier to not have to worry so much about going in with our sand color when there's already blue and have to worry about his belly turning green. So I do need to flip my canvas just a little bit in my easel so I don't end up taking paint out of his ear. My red's all nice and dry now because we've got some nice big lights and the heat on in here, so everything's drying up pretty quickly for me, which is good. That way we don't have to worry so much about it blending. I'm doing his second hand. Then I'm going to move on to his socks. I'm going to show you on the top sock, I think on your tracer, the foot that's kicking up in the air, it's missing the little band in between. So you can kind of just take and see where I separated it, just like that. Just makes it look like his sock is a little bit more rolled up. And on the bottom, I'll show you again as well, the bottom part of that sock is filled in with gray. Just gives it a little bit more of the idea of a shadow. And the same idea for this foot here that's kicking back, this is all filled in with gray too, instead of just outlined. I'm going to do the soles of his shoes now. Those are also filled in. And there we go. Just double checking to see, make sure I didn't miss anything. We will want to take a little bit of gray, and I'm actually going to hold it up to show you. On his shoes, this band right here and right here are going to, oops, can you see that? There we go. These two bands on his shoe, right in the middle, are going to stay white. So we might want to take our gray and just give a little line right there, and a little one on the top of his shoe. Just like that, just to make sure those stay easy to see and it doesn't look like his shoe's just leaking kind of into the white in the background. Awesome. So let's see. One more light color before we jump into some blue and some red. We're going to take just a little bit of our leftover yellow. You can see there's a little square right here on the top of his shoe. We're going to fill that in with yellow. Very carefully, we don't want to get into our gray, so just be very careful. Just like that. Give him a little yellow coin or whatever on the side of his shoe. And when you're all set, I'll give everyone some time. I know outlining takes a little bit. I'm going to pull out my dark blue, and this will be to fill in most of the rest of Sonic's body. Obviously, we don't want to fill in his nose or his eyes or his shoes with blue. His shoes are going to be red. His eyes will be green with black in the middle. And then obviously his mouth, his little smile, we want to leave nice and open. So I'm going to get out my blue. And I would say we'll want our tiny little brush, and maybe we'll use our medium, or rather our small, round, fluffy brush. So we'll give everyone some time to get those things out. All right. So for the blue, we want to start again with our little detail brush. And then we might end up filling in with the detail brush or upgrading to this flat brush. I mean, a medium-sized round brush, sorry. But I'm going to start with my detail brush, just like we've been doing before, outlining first and then filling in. So I'm going to start right at the top, right on his ear up here. And just very carefully outline. Now his ear is probably going to get all filled in with this first coat of blue. You want to come right up to the edge so there's no white space in between the sand color in his ear and the blue. I'm going to do this little section. I'm going to get my brush nice and skinny. To do that, you want to take the side of your palette. I'm going to take your blue. You're going to give it a little roll in the paint, and that'll help to twist all those bristles together, make it nice and pointy for you. So I'm going to come down the side of his face here, just like that. And then just start outlining. When I'm finished outlining his face, I'm going to go in and fill it in just so that all the paint color stays nice and consistent so that it doesn't start drying on me and then it's hard to work with. I'm going to get it right around his eye here, right around the, oops, the canvas moved on me, right around the edge of his mouth. There we go. I'm going to take my large brush. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just, real quickly before I do that, go right around here, just to get that worked in. These little hedgehog spikes. I'm going to take my round brush now. And very carefully just start filling in all that white space on his head. Nice, it's gonna start coming to life. It's kind of like a paint by number or a color by number, right? You outline everything and start filling in different colors as you go. Kind of fun. I like cartoon paintings like this. You really do see them come to life. Kind of just going back into his head a little bit before I start outlining anything else and just blending a little bit. You might actually, it's up to you, you could kind of go in with your brush and make some little brush strokes right down his spikes. It'll kind of look a little bit like fur. It's up to you. I'm going to put this brush in my water for the time being. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but hopefully your flat brush is sitting in there as well. If it's not, go ahead and pop it right in. It's not a big deal. Acrylic paint will dry on your brushes, but if you let it soak for a while, it's pretty easy to scrub it right off with some soap. No worries. So I'm going back with into my little brush here. You want to make sure you do come right down his shoulder because there is one little spike that kind of hides back behind his arm. And I'm just going to fill that in with my little brush. I might not even end up using that round brush again. It was really helpful for this big space here, but everything else is so close and tight that I think I'm going to stick with this little brush just to be safe. So I'm going to outline his belly, definitely his little tail, the side of his body, go right very carefully up around his shoulder so we don't lose that. Fill that area in. Where the paint is a little bit thicker, it's going to end up being darker. Where it's thinner, it'll end up being lighter. So you might want to go back and just give it, like I did with his face, just a little bit of help to kind of blend it all to the same consistency. Be careful around this leg here that you don't end up filling in this little gap in between this leg. Here, I'll outline it. Oops, I got my hand on my canvas. Fix that. Between this leg and his shoe. You don't want to fill that area in, because then it won't look like he's doing such a high kick, right? Such a move like this, right? So we want to make sure that that's just outline. And do his other leg. It might get a little bit tricky here, so I think I am going to do my little flip around. That way, I know that my paint down here is dry. So if I set my hand, as long as I don't have any blue paint on there, grab my white for a second, get that off. I know I won't end up sticking my hand in the blue, because that's really the wet paint right now. Start pulling it up. And just fill in the last little section here. Right like that. Perfect. All right. So now, our last step before we go in to do his face, all the little details and the black, we want to wash off our brush again, get all that blue off so his shoes don't end up purple. Although I guess you could give Sonic some purple shoes if you'd like. So it's up to you. But I'm going to use red, our nice bright red like we used in the background. And remember, his shoes, it goes red, white, red, right? You can see up here, red, white, red. We do want to make sure we leave that little white stripe in. It'll help his shoe look more three-dimensional, more like it's round instead of just a flat red shoe, right? Don't want him to look like he's wearing Ronald McDonald shoes. Just like this, and our gray should be drying up really nicely, so we don't need to worry about it mixing. Just like that. Same thing on the back. And then we'll do the same thing on his other shoe. Notice I'm still using my little tiny brush. I think this will be the brush we end up using for the rest of the class, unless you've got a script brush. You can use that to do the details on his face, but this detail brush is great for this step. I'm gonna wipe my brush off just a little. I just noticed there's some blue still in the metal part of the brush, not on my bristles, but farther up. Just scrub it off a little. There we go. And our last little bit of red's gonna go right here. Perfect. All right. I'm gonna get this brush nice and clean again, because the next color, if you mix it with red, it'll turn brown. So what we're going to do is we are going to mix. Remember I said that at the beginning of class. We're going to take a tiny, tiny little bit of blue on our brush, really the teeniest, tiniest amount. And we're going to put it into that pile of yellow that you set aside before. So we probably want, if you haven't yet, you probably want about that much yellow kind of dripping off my brush. It's easier to add a little bit more blue than it is to keep adding yellow to a really large amount of blue. So we definitely want to just start off with a tiny little bit of blue. I think mine needs a little bit more yellow. It's looking a little too teal for me, which means there's a little too much blue in there. There we go. I think that's a pretty nice green color. It's kind of like an electric green. You gotta see, just like that. And very carefully, we're going to go in and fill in all of his eyes. While we're working on our zigzag around here, his eyes will have enough time to dry to add his black pupil in there. So I want you to remember, and I'm gonna do this one first. His eye on this side of his face wraps right around where his nose goes, which I know is a little confusing, but it looks like that. And we're gonna do the same thing. We're just going to fill in all of his other eye. It'll look a little bit spooky, but once we add his pupil in, it'll look a lot less spooky. I'm gonna get my brush really nice and clean, although we're jumping into black, and black kind of takes over everything, so that's okay. So what we want to do next, there we go, is grab our black, your little black bag. We're gonna make a little pile on the side of our plate. I'm going to use my script brush, my long bristled skinny brush, but you can also use your little detail brush. That's totally fine. These ones are a little bit trickier, especially if you're going around edges, but we're not in this painting, at least right now. We're going to be doing, I am going to lay it flat, but what we're doing is pretty self-explanatory. We're going to take our black and just very carefully go right along the edge of the line. This is what I was talking about before. If you can kind of see on mine, I went a little bit over my pencil line with my yellow. So I'm gonna take some time to fix that up with my black. Very carefully follow your zigzags. I'm kind of holding it like this, not so much to show you, although I'm sure it's helpful, but it's really easier for me to have this really close to me. I can kind of put my elbow right against myself. I am wearing an apron, so I don't have to worry, although this is a paint shirt, you can kind of see I've got paint all over it. But this just makes it a little easier. It keeps your canvas nice and still. It won't slide around. It just gives me a little bit more control over what I'm doing. Flip it around, face it like this. It's always easier when you're doing lines like this to pull the brush towards yourself instead of trying to go away. I'm holding it just like a pencil, nice and close to the bristles. If I was holding it way out here, it would be a whole lot trickier, because I can't really rest my hand on the canvas and do that. It's always a good rule of thumb when you're painting to hold your paintbrush like a pencil. A lot of people like holding it like this, and that's okay if you're filling in a background, but it really gives you a lot more control if you hold it over, hold it just like you would hold a pencil to write or draw or color with. Because this part of painting, especially outlining, is a little bit like drawing, right? You're outlining and trying to stay on those lines. Need to flip it again. I'm having a little bit of trouble. There we go. Awesome. The last line here. All right. So I've got my starburst all outlined. I'll give you guys some time to catch up, and then we'll do the inside of his mouth with just a little bit of black to give him, make it look like he's smiling with his mouth open, and his nose and his eyeballs, his pupils. So we'll use the black for those. Any finishing touches. All right. So as I said, we're going to do a little tiny bit of black in his mouth right on his bottom jaw. We want to make it look like his, kind of like this. So I'm going to start really carefully. I want just the tiniest bit of black on my brush so we don't accidentally end up filling in his whole mouth and make him look like he is got no teeth. So, and if you come down a little bit into the sand on the bottom of his mouth, if you feel like you're having a lot of trouble keeping your brush nice and skinny, that's okay. It'll make him look like his mouth's just open a little bit wider. Try to stay right inside those lines. Just like that. And I'm gonna do a nice little outline. And while I'm outlining, it'll probably end up filling it in on his nose. Nose kind of comes down into his face just a little bit. Now it's a little confusing, so I'm gonna do his other pupil first. And that's gonna be just a little oval right in the middle of this other part of his eye. And I'm gonna do the tiniest little black right here like this. And I'm gonna hold it up so it's easier to see. And I think I actually need to add a little extra green. I think I went outside my line a little bit. So let's see. There we go. That looks a lot better. So just like that. And I'll do our next step really nice and close so that you guys can see. I'm going to take the very tip of my brush, or maybe even the back end. We're going to go into a little tiny bit of our sand. We're going to add a little highlight right in the same spot on each eye. We're going to go right here, in that corner, and right there on that eye. And that helps to make it look a little bit more cartoony, a little bit more realistic. If cartoons were real, right? It's a highlight. It's sort of like the light shining on his eyeball. All right. Well, my Sonic is all nice and finished. I'll stick around for a couple more minutes to see if any of our friends who are watching live have any questions or need any extra help for the last couple of minutes of class. Our last step is going to be to sign our initials somewhere on the bottom, either the left or the right of the canvas. There's plenty of space we left. So you could do your last name if you want, if there's enough room. we usually just do first and last initials. I'm going to do the 3 initials for Hammar's Art Studio, so I'll do HAS and then maybe date it with the year. So right in this corner with our little detail or script brush. Just like that. Awesome. So here's my finished Sonic. Hopefully you guys had a really awesome time doing some cartooning, some different style painting than you've done before, or maybe this is something you really enjoy and you've done it a lot. But we really had a great time teaching you guys, and we hope to have you join us again for another painting. We've got, like I said at the beginning, we've got this nice horse that we will be sharing on Friday, and it's got a special secret scented paint. Something sweet in there to kind of make the experience a little bit more fun. So we hope you guys had a great time arting with us today. Keep drawing, keep painting, and we hope to see you back here again soon. Thanks everyone, have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye.